Record. All right, now our words are
Immortalized
immortalized or something.
or something.
They are solely for private view, however.
Yes,
Protected.
we hope.
Protected, we hope. I do have a thought, though, because, if maybe I keep the video up on YouTube, say for 2 weeks, and then delete all the old ones from YouTube. That would, I think, offer a little more security and hopefully protection. I'm still going to keep my own file copies of them. I hope that's okay.
Right.
Yeah, it's fine.
So Thomas, are you asking, what do we think? Thumbs up.
I am asking what you think.
Yeah,
Thumbs up.
Agreed.
Oh, Fred Lawrence entered.
there's Fred. What happened to Ned?
Boston to Los Angeles.
What happened to Ned?
Ned seems to be having connectivity problems, he
Yeah,
said.
we lost him. He was here.
Yeah.
I had to try 3 different times to finally get through.
Oh, there's Johnny.
Oh my. But there you are. Johnny, good. How is the overall internet service there?
This is the first time I think I've encountered a problem. Park Plaza is really a great place for me.
Great.
Well, you're coming through quite well now.
And I'm well fed.
Yes, good.
Oh my,
And very importantly, well socialized.
yes.
That becomes rather obvious. So that is great. And we need some more dancing pictures or social videos.
I'll try to create that. I've had a little bit of interaction with some music, but nobody took any pictures this time. I'm not such a novelty anymore, I guess.
I got it. Well, if you'll let us know who those people are, we can pay them.
Oh, I think my 4 kids would pay them too.
Probably so. They'd absolutely love to see Papa flourishing.
Yes, that's the right word.
Good. Oh, that is so good.
So we've got Fred and Ned Shavira by name, but do we have sound or anything with them?
Fred, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. We
Okay.
can't see you. We can hear. Oh,
Now
okay.
we'll see Ned.
Fred, we can't see you, but we can
Hey,
hear
John.
you.
You're lucky.
I just lost total connection.
Oh my.
My computer was completely drained,
Ah,
but I'm back.
so you had to plug in the charger, huh? And wait for it to begin to kick in.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not a nice thing to happen.
nope, not in the middle of all this frivolity here.
Mhm.
Yeah, in the seminary, in the minor seminary, we used to have a saying that the seminary, the director of discipline or whatever we call dean of discipline, one of his lines was, "What's the rule on being happy?"
I like that kind of dean of discipline.
I don't know, was he trying to make up a rule that or what?
No, he was kind of, I don't know if he actually said it or if we said it, because he was kind of a dour cat. He was really a nice and good man, but he was very dour character. Kind of,
Oh,
you know.
How does that thing go?
And he had a tiny speech defect, so we used to say, "What the rule on being happy?"
That poor guy. Did you say it out loud in
Under
front of him?
So this
What's
was-
that saying that the floggings will continue until happiness
Yeah.
appears or something like that?
Frank, was this your most recent seminary experience?
No, my first shift.
First shift.
Yeah, very first, minor seminary. Yeah.
Yeah. What year of school? How old were you?
1960 to 62.
60 to 60.
Cardinal O'Connell Seminary in Boston, which is now the headquarters of the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.
There must be some interesting perspective on the
Some connection there.
some connection.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure you're talking about age 14 and 15.
no, 17 and 18
Oh, it was.
after high school.
Ah,
But of course, they still treated college students like high schoolers in the seminary.
Or grade schoolers.
Yeah. By the way,
That's
Frank,
That's where they told me in my first evaluation that I had seeds of intractability.
Ooh,
just speeds though.
intractability. Wow.
Of course, you didn't have to look that word up or anything.
Yeah, it's my unique flowering.
that sounds kind of like a book title that Thomas Merton might use.
Yeah, that's true.
Seeds of-
I'm thinking back,
Similarity is purely
Ned
coincidental.
and Tom, I think those high tension wires that were buzzing above us all those years probably had their influence. too.
Is that why my brain is shutting down?
Oh, yikes.
Well, I think the tragic death of Michael Gray had considerable influence on us.
That it did.
You know, he was also quite heroic. Remember how long he lasted
Yeah.
beyond any expectations? And
At least 2 or 3 weeks, wasn't it? And
oh no, it was months.
wow.
Months, and he had the nurses and doctors, all who were fallen away Catholic, not all, those who were fallen away Catholics, back and praising him for his just holiness. Really,
Mm-hmm.
it was amazing.
Speaking of holiness, this has nothing to do with holiness, but I want to acknowledge publicly Thomas for the gift of his computer skills. I have found the links, especially in the last couple of weeks, but even before then, the links you have provided have been just amazing. I have
Fascinating stuff.
I have been enjoying the Internet Archive resource, which I didn't know about, and I have been rereading Kleiss's The Last Western and enjoying it thoroughly. And reading it online, and then this past week, the most recent links that you sent in. Hi, Gary.
Right.
Welcome.
Yeah.
And the links you sent to the opening of the synod, the YouTube links.
I second that, Bob.
Those were incredibly rich, less for their words than for the visuals, and I think George had commented on that.
Yeah.
That is such a different, I mean, even you could turn the sound off and I turned it off for a while and just looked at the visuals, and it's like, this is the Vatican. This is a synod of bishops, tables in the round, and the mix at the tables, and the languages and the women, and you could go on and on and on. But thank you for your computer skills and your willingness to share them. I so appreciate.
Well, I'm eager to share. I'm grateful that, grateful to be acknowledged. That will kind of spur me on to keep sharing the stuff that I find interesting.
Good.
Gary Lombardi, we just spoke about Tim Gray. I mentioned the high tension wires and
Michael Gray.
reflected on what a saintly person he was. Do you remember the day? Were you outside?
Oh, yes, I remember it very well. Well, I wasn't outside, but all of a sudden there was kind of a boom, I remember. I think that's what it was. And I remember we rushed out, or somebody said something. He was flying an airplane
Correct.
on a wire.
Yeah,
And
model
it
airplane.
got into we had these high tension wires over the field, and I guess the whatever it is, it pulled the plane up, and he was electrocuted. But I remember running out to the field, and he was there were guys gathering around him, and there was I think one of the priests was with him, and he was moaning, or I don't know if he was screaming or moaning or whatever, and they were attending to him. I forget all the details of who was there. I assume
Tell you,
eventually-
I was playing
eventually
football
ambulance-
on the upper field and heard the report. It was like a shotgun blast. Looked down and he was in violent convulsions
Yeah.
on the ground. I ran down and Tom Cotton had just reached him and touched him, received an electric shock, but
Hmm.
the convulsions stopped. And you might remember Tom Cotton was
He was the infirmarian, wasn't he?
infirmarian, yes. So he gave the best care any of us could have given, I think.
And he
but
lasted for a couple of weeks before he died.
Ned thought it was months. It was quite a
Was it
long
that
time.
long?
It was months, yeah.
Oh.
It went far, far beyond any expectations that the doctors had. He was burnt so badly internally. And there were a whole bunch, at least, the reports that we got were that a lot of fallen away doctors and nurses and others who witnessed his heroism, his peace in the face of the pain, and his cheerfulness. Get back to the church. Thought he was a saint. Maybe he was.
I wasn't there and I don't know about this. Are you saying that he did survive the shock
Oh,
and
no,
and lived for a while?
he died. Yes, he survived the shock for months. I don't know, 5-6
How
months.
did the shock happen?
I'm sorry.
How did the shock happen?
He was
He
flying. He was flying an airplane, Frank. It was one of those days. The little plane would connect with
Wires.
controls in your hand, and it was a wire.
Yeah,
The plane was circling around, and it was underneath high tension wires over our
Yeah.
sports
Yeah.
field.
yeah,
And I think he got close enough to whatever their arc is that it was like a magnet, and it
yeah,
pulled that plane over
Yeah.
the wire, and of course the electricity went through the wire to his hand and
Yeah.
electrocuted him.
yeah.
That's what happened.
It was a day that no one expected. We were going to be out on the on the football field or our field, but we had a visitation from the Vincentian. I don't know, the head of the Vincentians, and he gave us a talk. Started off with something like, what was it? I can't remember, but it was very funny because for this very learned man to say what he said, just to correct everybody up. What was it? St. Augustine loved his mother because she was his mother, something like that. I don't know what it was. Anyway, he declared a free day, and we all ran out to the down to the lockers and changed and ran out to the field. And I remember I got there very quickly, and Mike, what was his first name? Gray.
Mike,
Tim.
Mike,
Mike.
Mike.
Michael.
Okay. Mike was out, taking advantage of the interim before everybody got all their duds on to play, and across the field were these very, very high electrified thick wires that went into San Fernando.
a major grid. It's a major high
Yeah.
tech.
Huge.
Yeah,
I guess they got the property cheaply for whatever reason. And Mike was holding on to the plane through the wires that Gary was talking about. And I was sitting on a little slope looking at him. And the plane all of a sudden went up, way up, and then did a loop right onto the wire.
Mm.
And this little ball of light went from the wires down to where he was standing with his arms straight up and hit him. And it was like he was stiff and he bounced up and down and then stood there with his arm straight up and then collapsed again, seemingly very stiffly. And I ran down there and somebody yelled, "Don't touch him," you know. And I turned around and ran back to the main compound. I was going to look for a priest to get some oils and anoint for an anointing. And I found Father Kevin. What was his last name? I can't remember.
Keen?
And
Was that Keen?
Exactly, Father Kevin Keen. And he said, "I know what happened." I said, "How do you know?" I just got here. And he said, "I know, here." And he gave me this little box. And I ran back. And as I got to the field, it was just this amazing scene. The field was covered with seminarians kneeling down.
Down. I remember that.
It
Yeah.
was just amazing. And I think it was Father Haley and maybe Father our Dean of Discipline was Father Wong.
Lee.
We called him Wong.
Albert Lee. We used to call him Long Wong Lee.
That's right. They were there and they anointed him. And after the ambulance took him away, there was this little round cone of earth that had been blown out where he was standing.
Mhm.
I guess the folks were smoking too, Ned.
Yeah. It was just,
There seemed to be smoke around it.
yeah.
And-
But to run back to the huge field that we had and see this sea of guys kneeling down praying, it was just, never forget it, ever.
How
You know,
long?
when I lived in Thousand Oaks, an incident like that happened on the same wire towers. As they
Wow.
go up the grade from
Yeah.
Camarillo up into Thousand Oaks. And a
Yeah.
young man took it on a self dare, I think, to climb one of those towers.
Oh,
And when he got up to the top, touched a wire and couldn't move. And
Yeah.
incredibly, one of the firefighters from the Camarillo Fire Department went up the tower after him and brought him down.
Wow.
He lived for a few weeks, but he didn't live for very long.
Yeah. I just remember eventually, and you say it was months later, Ned. I do remember we prayed for him all the time.
Yes.
And then one day we're in class with Charlie Barr, and there's a knock on the door, and he opens the door, and someone says something to him, and I just remember him just kind of putting his hands on just slumping down, saying, "I'm so sorry." I forget what it was, and that's when he told us that he had just died. So I've always remembered that time.
Mhm.
That really was.
Well, there's sacred moments. I was with a 95-year-old priest this morning who's going to hospice. And we were sitting and talking, and he said, "Frank, I know it's getting close. You can't live forever." That's such a sacred moment.
Yeah.
Because it's an incarnational moment because it's so deeply human
Yeah.
that it admits you to something that's unequaled in human experience, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
talk about intimations of mortality. For teenagers to have experienced what you experienced, I wonder, because I'm thinking back to a somewhat, didn't involve electricity, it involved a drowning. But I'm wondering if others have had similar, during the teenage years, incredibly impressionable, formative, about the harder questions that we're suggesting this morning about life, living, mortality, that someday it's going to end, and the impact on that for life choices that has always intrigued me. And yeah, my story, it didn't involve electricity, it involved water, and that was, I was the in those days was my late high school years, and I was the head lifeguard on a recreation beach attached to an amusement park. For those of you in New England, you may even have heard of it. It was pretty well known. It was called Whalum, WHALMON, in Lunenburg in Massachusetts. Its motto was, "For a whale of a time, come to Whalum." And one of the offerings that they had was this private beach, guarded, and people used to come from all over. And this one particular summer day, a gathering of, as it turned out, I discovered later, was in those days, the CYO group from a Boston parish, and one of the Southie parishes, Frank. So a lot of Irish names attached to it. And at the end of the day, when they gathered up, went to the locker room and gathered up all their stuff, one of the lockers was left unopened. And you know how it spun out from there. They started talking to the kids, and when's the last time you saw him, blah, 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 blah. And as it turned out, one of the last places, after they did the announcements in the park and everything else, one of the last places that they looked was, of course, the beach area. And by then, the owner manager of the park, who, by the way, his son was a knacker, Henry Bowen. So the owner of Whalum Park's son. But at any rate, so the fire department got in there and started dragging in the area, and they very quickly recovered the body. But I just remember the incredible impact on me, and I, in tears, in the owner's unit in the park, just. And him comforting me and basically saying, these were a bunch of kids, they were having a hell of a time. And one of the firemen basically said, kind of looks like from the bruise on his head, that, they were horsing around as kids will do, and all jumped in off, say, the tower on the float, because that's where he was found, and probably, knocked him unconscious. He just slipped under. No one noticed anything. They never missed him. But I just remembered as you guys are describing it and reliving the moment, I was sort of reliving those moments, and I didn't get a lot of comfort, but that the owner basically said, he said, "Bob, if I close the park because of every person who stood up on," and they had one of these amazing roller coasters, people came all over, stood up when they shouldn't oughta and didn't have the right, those were the old days, didn't have belts. He said, for the numbers who fell off and killed themselves, he said, we would have closed up a long time ago. He said, that's why we carry a lot of insurance. And he said, yeah, you have nothing to do with it. And he said, and maybe there's a lesson there for us. And a couple of weeks later, he called me back and he said, how would you like to learn to scuba dive? And I went, oh, I'd love it. So he says, I have a Navy SEAL friend. They had different names in those days, but who'd be happy to teach you to use basic equipment so that we could add that dimension of security for just checking out resources on underwater and stuff like that. So that was one of the pluses of it. But I remember going home and I was still in tears. My mother tried to comfort me, Dad, other family members after I told them what had happened, and because I was just feeling like, I was on duty. This happened on my watch, and I told them, and I think I discovered after, I'm not sure how I did it, but I went to the wake and I went to the funeral in Boston, and at the time learned that like the rest of you guys, he was thinking of going to a seminary after, not surprising, so many did, going to seminary and being a priest. And I remember the impact that had on me too at the time. That he won't be able to do this. He'd already gone home to God. The bottom line in all of this is, do you have any, in your teenage years, any end of life experiences that you were close to? And I just throw out the question, which is still a question for me, how formative was that in terms of my development, in terms of life choices, in a very meaningful way? With hindsight, I can say, looking back from my almost 82nd year next week, and say, it was all formative, and it's all grist for the mill. But wonder about the rest of you.
I've got one that's coming to mind as you're talking. When I was in 8th grade, one of the girls who had been in the same class since 1st grade, Donna Wandell, and I knew her quite well. We were friends, not quite to the stage of boyfriend, girlfriend, probably far from that actually, but she was a really, really good girl, and she developed some kind of a sickness that she died very rapidly within a week or so, after she stopped coming to school. And and that hit our 8th grade class very hard. I remember I was one of the pallbearers at her funeral, but I can remember one of my classmates lamenting, that she was so young. And the thought that occurred to me was, well, now she's older than the rest of us.
Uh-huh.
But, that, and I think that was probably my only real youthful encounter with with the experience of somebody that I knew really well dying.
You weren't in that seminary class with the rest of the guys here?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
But that's
so
what
there
it
was
was a couple of years before that.
so there was another.
Oh yeah, I was sort of taking that one for granted. Yeah.
We were in high school then with my
Right.
friend.
Boy,
I
hey,
forget
Craig.
how he
I
was.
think we were 2nd year high school and Mike Gray was 1st.
Something like that. He was
Something
about,
like
I think
that.
that's right, Tom.
was a year behind us, well, he was behind us anyway. So,
We started in 1956 is my recollection.
yeah,
Right.
And then 60, and then 64, and then 68.
Right.
96 students started. I was one of the few who came from a public school. And in the end, I think 6 out of the 96 became priests. Am I right, Tom? Would you think that's?
Something like that. I'm looking on the wall at the.
Oh, at the seminary.
But I'm too lazy.
Other guys came in from other dioceses.
Yeah.
Monterey, Fresno, and Arizona, and the Philippines, I think.
Yeah. I've been meaning to take that picture down and make a, scan it into a fairly high resolution photo. I think I'll try to do that soon and send it out.
Gary, I'm remembering, weren't you from one of the outer regions of Newhall? Isn't that right?
Marginalized.
I was from Newhall, which was just over the hills. It's about a 10-minute drive now from the San Fernando Valley. I mean, it's less than 10 minutes from the seminary, and I guess that's the outer.
Depends on traffic, Gary. It depends on traffic.
I know that it could be 45 minutes or 8, but and this priest, Father Daspit, Arthur Daspit, was, I forget if he taught us Latin, but he called me the Domine de Montibus, the guy from the mountains, from the hills.
He was such a great guy.
I remember
We
Daspit
walk
was-
around with our hands in our pockets, and he'd look at us, and then if we didn't pull them out, he'd say, "Domine." Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I have two recollections, well, a lot of recollections of Daspit, but one of them was he was monitoring our walking out of the dining hall, and he started calling Dotson, 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 near.
He called him what?
He started, it was one or the other. He was either saying, calling as he was walking out, Dotson, Dotson, and then he suddenly realizes, no, near.
Oh, it's Gary.
He had the wrong name.
Had red hair.
Both red hair.
Well, he had some problems with memory. Remember the
Memory,
time
he was
He
very.
did.
he came in and we'd always start with a prayer in Latin, and we'd end the class
Veni
with
Sancte
prayer.
Spiritus,
Yes, and
Maria Mater Gratiae.
right. And he
Yes.
walked in, knelt down at the little platform that the
Last
desk
prayer.
was on, and he started the prayer, and instead of answering appropriately, we answered with the prayer for the end of the
Prayer.
class.
And he
Yeah.
got up and walked out.
Yeah, and he got up and walked out. And we all sat there for, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, wondering what was going to happen. And then the door opens and he sort of glides in, and he's going, funny, Domine, funny.
You know what is always
That happened once. That happened once too in Rome with Father Danis. Remember Edward Danis?
Yes.
Kind of spacey. He's a Belgian great theologian, and he came into class one day and started Nomine Patris Filii Spiritus Sancti and said the closing prayer for class.
Everybody
And,
got
some guy chuckled, and that brought his attention, so he changed. And afterwards, everybody went after the guy who chuckled, because they said if you hadn't chuckled, he'd have finished the prayer and walked out of the classroom.
right.
Not to make light of Bob's story, but the possibility of seeing a whale in Whalum Park is absolutely nil, because Lunenburg is landlocked.
I know. It was Lunenburg was my first kind of full-time parish assignment as well. Saint Boniface, and it was actually there's an interesting, I'll say it quickly, story behind how a parish. The then bishop was a guy named John Wright, who eventually went on, as you know, to bigger and better things or worse things, depending on your perspective. But anyway, he was the first new bishop of the new diocese of Worcester. And it wasn't too long before he decided he really wanted to get a Catholic parish in Lunenburg. But this was, in those days, I have to be careful how I say this. This is going to get erased in 2 weeks, right? But it was about as, quote, Black Protestant a town as you could get, with the people coming off the Mayflower's ancestors buried in the local cemetery, and the Methodist Congregational Church downtown. This, of course, is in the old days, right? Pre-Vatican II, so it's a different culture. When he approached, or the spokesman for the diocese approached the powers that be in Lunenburg to put up a church, they basically went, "Are you kidding me? There are enough Catholics at churches around and everything else." So the story goes, and apparently was verified later on, he used, I guess in those days, the term was called a wooden purchaser. Does that ring a bell for Frank shaking his head, those who business backgrounds and stuff, but completely unidentified as a representative of the diocese. But this piece of land was available, and the wooden purchaser approached the powers that be and said, "We'd like to put up a box factory on this location." And the folks said they had done their homework. There was very little industry. It would be very clean, and almost use terms like green, whatever, no pollution or anything else. It would be producing boxes that would be used in business and producing boxes. And so they went, "Oh, no problem, no problem." And then 6 months later, there's a sign in front of it. New home of the Church of St. Boniface, sideline Lunenburg, Germany, Nova Scotia. John Wright was a classicist, Boniface, Germany connection. So at any rate, well, they were up in arms, and they went, "Leave it to you Catholics to deceive us." He said, "Deceive you? No one deceived you. We said we were going to build boxes, and we are confessional boxes."
Well, the parish I was in Sharon, from which I retired, same thing happened 1906. They got a straw, which called a straw buyer, to buy the property because they wouldn't sell directly to Catholics.
So that was part of the tradition, apparently. No one ever said that.
Yeah,
John
Yeah,
Wright wasn't a bright fellow, and he certainly was. And so there it was. But that was my first full-time parochial assignment, St. Boniface in Lunenburg. Great experience.
You know what struck me though, as we were talking about, and I've thought about this a lot lately, I guess because of the age we have reached, but all those guys who taught us that we were, and that's everybody here. I mean, our professors and our this and that, they were all younger than we are now, and they were just, just as we experience our own humanity and our own, gifts and strengths and weaknesses and our own faith and lack of faith and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure they had the same sort of thing, and here they are forming us, and teaching us. It's just.
Well, I suspect some of those that we regarded as being very old died younger than we are now. I'd have to go back and look up the obituary records and all of that, but I would suspect Doc Tolman was younger than we are now. Who was the old Navy salt that we had in college?
Joe Phoenix?
No. He was a Navy guy who I remember he had them read Admiral of the Ocean Sea, the biography of Columbus, in the refectory, and whoever was reading it decided to skip the part that gave all the dimensions of the ship and how it was constructed and so on, and And at that point, the guy Edwards, Joe Edwards,
Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, he, stands up and he says, "You left out half the goddamn book."
But there was a guy named Joe Phoenix. Remember, we were in
Oh,
college,
Phoenix, yeah, I
and
remember. Yeah.
he wandered around always smoking a cigarette, and he was just kind of a no-nonsense sort of guy. And I remember some I forget if we were in theology or what, and he said, I think they just switched from Latin to English in the breviary. But I remember him saying, yeah, I don't know. He says, I've thought, he says, how did he say it? Oh, I think the church has been wrong for the last 50 years, he says, but it doesn't make any difference. I'm here now. That's the first time I ever heard any priest ever say anything about the church being less than perfect.
Mhm.
Wow, ain't that the truth?
It's not that way now.
For sure, especially if you just pay attention to the news and listen in. And what an amazing week it has been. Kind of started for me at Mass last weekend, when after Mass I wasn't surprised. I went up to the celebrant, the acting pastor of the parish, and I said, I'm kind of disappointed that there was no mention of the Synod of Bishops opening in Rome.
Yeah,
In-
not in our parish either. Nothing.
In the prayers for the church and in the usual prayers, no mention of prayers, no, nothing like that. And he
No.
kind of looked at me and he went, "You're right." He said, "I'll make sure it happens to this was a vigil mass on Saturday. I'll make sure it happens tomorrow." Well, I just happened to talk to someone who was at the masses on Saturday, and he went, "No mention."
Zip.
I'm not surprised, because that has sadly been the situation here in the Oakland diocese with the influence of the San Francisco Archbishop. And
Who's talking?
Frank,
Probably.
breaking up.
Especially with us Americans. You go to a meeting, question is, what's the takeaway?
Frank,
What's the product?
I don't think we heard the
And
the
the
prelude
synod
to
is
what
we
you're
had it.
saying.
Set the context, Frank. You were garbled.
Yeah, you're frozen in my.
Your
Monitor.
picture is frozen. Your voice is garbled.
We may have lost him
Hey,
for
Frank, but it's a nice picture.
It is a yeah. I'm thinking of taking a screenshot.
There we go.
There he is.
There
Now
you
you
go.
can see him.
Can you hear me?
You
Yeah.
traded places with
now
Russ.
we
See you now too.
Well, whatever I was gonna say, there was someone who didn't want me to say it.
No, say it.
An electric intervention.
Well, tomorrow, for instance, the Feast of the Holy Rosary. And the specific readings, for example, the first one's from Acts, where after the resurrection, Mary and some other women, and estimates are about 120 people, the disciples are sent to pray together to a room and to wait in expectation for the coming of the Holy Spirit. I mean, that's what the synod's about.
Amen.
And it's interesting that Pope Francis, in one of his, wasn't it the homily for the new cardinals, compared the cardinals not with those in the upper room, but with those who were down below, experiencing the effects of those who are filled with the Spirit. I may be garbling it a little bit, but does anybody recall hearing that or reading that?
We did have the emphasis on symphony, which is probably an idea that he took from Rana, and the whole question of diversity and the ability, perhaps the Holy Spirit is the agent that brings the symphony together.
Well, I have always been extremely fascinated, because I am a lover of classical music. you know, just exactly how a conductor
Yeah,
creates a unified whole with a unified interpretive dimension from an orchestra of 100 different musicians, each one with their own ideas. You know, probably 90% of the musicians in an orchestra feel that they could conduct this better than the conductor is. But you know, and I got to know Paul Solomonovich, the famous choral conductor out here, pretty well. And I asked him about that. You know, what exactly is the major thing that you have to do as a choral conductor to create the sound and the performance that you do? And he says, the main thing I have to do is to get everybody to listen to one another. That whatever I do there, however I wave my hand or raise my eyebrows or whatever, it's to get them to listen to one another, which I thought was a fabulous
Oh, yeah.
insight into
You,
leadership.
you mentioned choral conductor. Did you get into any conversation related to instrumental? And might there be variations in terms of the need for more or less if you're conducting a symphony orchestra, say? I'd be interested.
No, we never did go there. I kind of generalized that same, you know, I mean, I've heard interviews of instrumental conductors, you know, Andre Previn or Esa-Pekka Salonen or those talking about their art and their craft, saying pretty much the same thing, the importance of listening.
I would think that, yeah, that's a good insight. Sounds like something relevant to the synod.
Very much so.
It's
Yeah.
a variation,
Oh, yeah.
variation on a choral group and or a symphony. And I must say, from the video that I looked at, the first one that you had sent, Thomas, the listening, just want to turn off the audio, the listening that was going on, including the number of, I was trying to imagine how many simultaneous translators that they had in the booth somewhere around. They must have had a lot. Does anyone know offhand about how many languages are being used? I would imagine there were quite a few, though I was impressed with how much English there was right from the beginning.
Yeah.
But at any rate, like a symphony, and the amount of listening that was going on was pretty impressive.
Yeah, let's hope that stays.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
And let's hope that 90% of the content of what they hear is not made public, so that it actually can be a real process for them rather than something that they have to look over their shoulders all the time to see how this is playing with their constituencies.
But there seems to be somebody, there's some woman from the NCR or America who's writing something almost on a daily basis. And then there's a podcast I fell asleep last night listening to a podcast from, I guess, NCR. It's like a kind of a report. Is it supposed to be weekly? I don't know. This gal seems to be writing every day.
Right. A brethren, fratelli, if you come across something that is particularly good related to that, please, I would appreciate getting the link to at least give me a chance to take a quick look at it or whatever. But I like the rest of you, I suspect I'm very interested in anything that, unlike what someone just said, especially if stuff is leaking out. Click Xavier Rin 2. What's that? What's that about? And I had this fantasy of Thomas doing AI with the first one or the second one and saying, give it to us in the style of the original Xavier Rin, because the one I read was rather, it was not Xavier Rin.
Well, it was First Things.
Yeah, it had Murphy turning over in his grave, I suspect.
Well, I'm sure. And the only the only name attached to any of the articles was George Weigel.
Sure,
Yeah.
okay, so, yeah, and
But
my.
Weigel seems to, you notice I pointedly used the expression, they copped the mantle of Xavier Rinn.
Ah, missed that little detail. I'll look at it again. Yes, and also, as you mentioned, hey, this is from First Things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you went, yeah.
Yeah,
I know you have to be careful, right? No, I kind of looked at it and I went, "Yeah, okay,
yeah,
This-
it seems like
Murphy,
it's probably
Francis Murphy.
Weigel and Company.
right." But I'm kind of looking still for an Xavier Rinn in the style of the original. Well, what was his first name? But his last name was Murphy, the Redemptorist, who was
Francis Xavier Murphy.
Francis X. Murphy.
Francis Xavier Murphy, CSSR.
Well, you think I could remember that last name? Murphy was my wife Mary Alice's last name. She was a Murphy
Now you will
My
remember.
daughter's a Murphy.
from Cork.
Yes,
The
You
Cork
know, I
connection.
think- I don't think the Xavier Rinn thing applies in as much as the Vatican Council was intent on producing a series of doctrine with pastoral effect. I don't think the synod's intent on doing that. There may or may not be a document from the Holy Father as a result of it. And I think may or may not is important. So the notion that someone's going to explain, how far they went along the road to approving women as deacons or something. I don't think that's an adequate measurement for what might happen in the synod.
Ah,
And as for what might happen in the church, frankly, the last person I would assign that duty to is George Weigel, a master of distortion and a nasty human being. So it boggles the mind.
Tom, is that why you went, yeah, when you mentioned that?
Well, yeah, I mean, and
Master
sadly, he was also the official hagiographer of St. John Paul II.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I use those terms.
Hagiography is the right word because according to George Weigel, John Paul II never did anything wrong, like appoint McCarrick, an auxiliary bishop, a bishop of a diocese, an archbishop of 2 archdioceses, and a cardinal.
Yeah.
And they try to lay that at Pope Francis's feet.
Sure.
Yeah.
Was Weigel, Frank, is
Ah,
Weigel a
gee.
convert? Was he, what's his history? Is he a priest
Who,
or
Weigel?
a layman? He's a layman, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, he's not a priest, yeah.
His brother is a priest. He's got a brother who's a priest, I think.
It seems that he's some kind of principle with respect to first things.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
I think it's-
He was
his brother-
also
Jesuit.
the point man when there was that effort in the early 20th century to form an alliance with the evangelicals. And the 2 point people on the discussion were Weigel and Chuck Colson,
Wow.
who was an evangelical leader.
Yeah.
And it was
Wasn't he
based.
also, sorry,
Go ahead, Tom.
wasn't he also one of those sent by George W. Bush to convince Pope John Paul II to support the invasion of Iraq?
I don't know if he was sent, but I do know that after John Paul sent Pio Laghi to Washington to try to convince George Bush not to do it, he disagreed with that decision. And he's also accused in a book, I forget what the name of it is, I have it here somewhere, by an Italian theologian named Massimo Borghese of being part of a cabal with Richard John Newhouse and Michael Novak to distort Pope John Paul II's encyclical Centesimus Annus on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum to indicate that John Paul II was in fact a supporter of American-style capitalism, when in fact he was not.
I'm going to continue listening, but I'm going to bow out for a few minutes because I have to help the fleet come under the Golden Gate. It's Fleet Week here in San Francisco,
Oh, yeah.
and unless I help them, they'll hit the top of the bridge. So I have to go on my scope and make sure they make it. But I'll be listening. I'll be listening and be right back.
You best help those guys.
I used to read Weigel all the time because he used to be published every week in the Tidings when I lived in Los Angeles, which I guess is not the name of the paper anymore, but
It's the Angelus.
two really nasty things he did. When Bob Drinan died, after his death, he totally ignored Nil de Mortuis Nisi Bonum and wrote this dreadful article about Drinan. And on the other hand, when Chuck Colson died, he canonized him. And I think Chuck Colson, by the way, probably had a fairly legitimate conversion. His first wife is a neighbor of mine and a friend of mine, actually. And I know his daughter and his autistic grandson. She's written a book on autism. His daughter has. So, but Weigel, it seems to me, is like, I think the book on John Paul II was distorted. It was just, I read most of it, but not all of it.
Right. You're still talking about Weigel, huh?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not worth it, but anyway.
I remember meeting him at a conference in that one year I was at Louvain in 67, 68. And this was a conference in related to one of the seminars that we were doing, a reflection on Humani Vitae. And this was a gathering of folk from all over the place at a Congress, a weekend Congress convention in Louvain. And I remember at the time meeting Weigel, either part of a discussion group and or meeting him because American sort of, and I just remember him as being a really kind of nice guy and pleasant, charming guy. And I remember reading his stuff after, and then beginning to watch this evolution of the shift. He was, this is 66, 67. He was 67, 68, who's counting? And he was fairly open and pleasant, and then begin to watch this evolution of moving, much less from center left to, center right to extreme right. And at the time, with an ongoing interest in sort of psychological development and how people change, beginning to observe that happening around me, not in me, of course, but classmates, and then also reading, looking at things, and then later on, looking at some of the biographies, looking at the story, of Benedict and his early days and his relationship. It was hard to tell the two young rebels, Kung and him, apart for a while. And then something happened, which I suspect has a great deal more with how we're put together in terms of human psychology and development than it has to do with inspiration of the Holy Spirit or whatever else, although God help me, the Spirit's full of surprises, one never knows. So, but I observed that, and part of me was surprised to read, is this the same Weigel that I had met, who was part of this conversation related to Humani Vitae, and basically
when was that, Bob?
This was in Louvain in 67, 68. I was ordained
68.
George
Humani Vitae. Humani Vitae
would
came
have
out in
been
July
about
of 68.
15 or 16 years old at that time. So it may not be the same person.
My God, I'm
He was
pretty
born
sure.
in
Could it,
nineteen
could it,
fifty-one.
could it have been his
72
old, could
years
it have
old
been
now.
his older brother? You
It
know,
must be George.
his brother's a Jesuit. You know, I may have conflated the two bad. But I think you get the general idea.
Yeah.
Of my attempt to basically say things happen to us that affect us in terms of choices and decisions that are very impactful in terms of our environment. And I'm thinking back to, you know, Erik Erikson's stages of development, and our conversation earlier about being in seminary in our teenage years, but that the developmental task for the teen years, roughly teen years, is the creation of identity. You know, the who we will be, and at any rate,
I think, by the way, just as a side comment, I think those guys are rad trads, and that their theology is very much infected by the personalities of their opponents. Where I don't think Benedict XVI was that way. I think Benedict XVI, although he did some really bad things in terms of like Father Dupuy in South Africa and that, but I think he was a genuine conservative.
I think so too.
And I think actually that history will be a little kinder to him than some of the nasty kind of personal things he did when he was the prefect. In the long range of history, I think Benedict will have a very, very interesting place in Catholic tradition.
Fred, do you?
When I was a grad student in Basel, I got to be in a seminar with Karl Barth for 3 semesters, doing really the text of the council, and Ratzinger was invited by Barth to come when we discussed Lumen Gentium, and he really seemed like a very, very balanced,
Yeah.
and honest person to me.
about how old was he at the time, Fred? Roughly?
I wouldn't even be able to tell you how old I was.
That was my next. That was my
Well,
next
with
question.
respect to the
Thank you.
council, Fred, how long was it after the council concluded? Do you know?
Lumen Gentium was already a text that was printed and handed out as a constitution on the church.
Okay, so he was in his 30s. He was 35 when, as a peritus at the council. Ratzinger was.
And he was kind of a hero. I mean, he was sort of, he was a more liberal kind of theologian at the time when he advised the German bishops.
Yeah.
It's
He
hard
was,
to sort-
he was mentioned in the same breath with Congar and Gasly.
Yeah. And
Well, the document on Revelation, the original thing was De Fontibus Revelationis.
Yeah.
And Ratzinger looked at it, and of course he was the peritus for Frings, and
Yes.
Frings is one of the fathers of the council.
Yeah.
He had a wonderful platform. Ratzinger said, how can we talk about Revelation without first talking about the Word of God?
Mhm.
And so the document's called Verbum Dei, and the first chapter is on the Word of God, not on the fonts of Revelation. That comes later. And that's because of Ratzinger. And it's a very profound and important development in the whole history of the Catholic Church and the Word of God and the Bible. For which I think history will give him, you know, this 35-year-old priest, great honor.
Right. Hey, as a quick aside, just want to let you know that the Golden Gate Bridge is still there. The Navy didn't hit it.
Oh, thank God.
And
Right.
it only took you 5 minutes.
And the firefighting boats from San Francisco were there in all their magnificence, spraying it so they helped them stay in line, and so the Navy came through successfully.
On our sabbatical, we had, this is in 2002 at the North American College, we had a professor named John Fuhlenbach. He was kind of the, I suppose, the one that a lot of seminarians really, he was a doctrinal theologian, and that he gave us a couple of weeks, and he said, I'm a perfectly balanced theologian. Two of my professors were Hans Kung and Joseph Ratzinger. And he said, of the two, Ratzinger was the better theologian. So he had a high regard.
No
I
doubt
think
about
no question. Yeah.
Whatever
Because
happened?
Bob and I had similar things, because two professors that we had for moral theology were, what's his
Fuchs.
name? Marcelino Zalba and Joseph Fuchs. You couldn't be farther on the spectrum.
Whatever happened to Kung? Does anybody know?
He died.
Oh,
He died about 2 years ago.
A couple of years ago, but not before he did what, volume 3 of his life. Or
didn't he
was it volume
die
4?
significantly out of favor?
No, actually, it was very interesting. John Paul would never see him. The first person that Ratzinger saw for what was scheduled for about a half a 45-minute meeting after he became Pope was Kung
Wow,
at Castel Gandolfo, and it was a 4-hour dinner.
my goodness.
And
Who was
the
it?
fact,
Who was it, Frank? Who was-
Ratzinger, when he became Pope, he received
Oh,
Kung.
Ratzinger.
right.
Yeah.
I-
And of
I
course,
mean,
the whole thing was, Kung was a man of the world, kind of. He'd drive up to what was the German the university they were at? Begins with a T.
Tübingen.
What was it?
Tübingen.
Tübingen.
And so Kung would show up in his red convertible 2-seat roadster, and Ratzinger would come up in a broken down old bicycle. But
Right.
Ratzinger saw it was important for him to do that, because it was the kind of thing that John Paul would not do with Kung.
Right, and the context of that encounter was a long meal in the Italian style,
And Castel Gandolfo, yes,
and just the
was-
two of them.
just the two of them. Wouldn't
and
you love
I-
to have been a fly on the wall?
I remember, oh boy, I remember reading about it at the time, and I couldn't help but think whether they talked Eucharist, they were doing Eucharist and reconciling, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, because Kung had
wasn't
said
Ratzinger-
just before the election that if Ratzinger got elected Pope, it would be a disaster for the church.
Wasn't Ratzinger a conciliator? Kind of a 9 on the Enneagram, understanding both sides and trying to bring people together. That's always been my.
Man who knows the Enneagram.
That would have been his desire to bring the Lefebvre group
Yeah.
back into the church.
So on the one hand,
That's
Lefebvre,
why he
and on
allowed the
other hand,
Latin
Kung.
Mass. That would have been, if that's what it is, that would be behind why he did at least those two things then.
Yeah,
'Cause I
I've
think-
always liked him,
yeah.
in spite of the fact that Herb
I-
Brown kept saying he's a Platonist, he's a Platonist.
Well, he's not a neo-scholastic.
He was an Augustine.
He
He was an Augustine
Right.
scholar.
And Bonaventure, did his work on Bonaventure, and was very familiar with contemporary German philosophers when he was a young professor growing up in Germany.
He sure was brilliant.
You could do worse than that.
Yeah.
And I,
I'm
and I
Fred.
dare say, and I dare say, Eucharistic
Fred adds
theology,
from a world of experience in the life of the intellect.
and I dare say his Eucharistic theology was far more sophisticated and pastoral than that of the U.S. bishops under the leadership of the beloved Robert Barron. In other words,
Surprise, surprise.
yeah. However, that being
Was that a
said,
tautology or something?
I'm currently reading the book that Word on Fire published on the theology of Robert Barron, and I am finding his theological influences to be fascinating. One of the first one was Andrew Greeley.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In the first really significant book that Barron wrote, I think it's called "And Now I See." What's his name? Greeley had a little piece that said, "With this book, Barron enters into the company of the best theologians in the United States."
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, they were good friends.
They were a personal friend. He considered Greeley a mentor.
Yeah.
And a friend.
Well, he certainly
But Greeley
was
wasn't a great
guy.
theologian.
No,
Oh,
Pardon? Frank?
And Greeley also, if you read some of his serious books, at least in some of them, he states a far out position, not exactly far out, and then he spends the rest of the book retreating from it. That's
Right.
classical Barron.
He was a halfway decent sociologist.
Yeah, he was a very good sociologist.
Yeah.
actually.
Well,
He was at the University of
some
Chicago.
of his colleagues might question that, Frank, but at any
Yeah,
rate,
okay,
but
I would-
he was good enough, and he certainly enjoyed the last years of his life while he was still professoring, maintaining that elegant apartment,
That was in Arizona.
penthouse apartment in Chicago,
on
but
the lake.
making sure to teach in Arizona and do some visiting professoring here at Berkeley, even from time to time, to escape the winter in Chicago. And
Right.
he knew how.
But giving a lot of the money that he made on his books
He did.
for
Yeah.
Catholic schools.
Yes.
Yeah.
I read
He
lots of
was-
his books. I thought they were great.
He's not an easy person to write off. He was a
Right.
substantial presence.
Right.
I agree.
Take a
I
step.
didn't know that they were good friends. That's
Very close, very, very close.
Yeah.
I also think that, Fred, you might know this, that Barron had a very good relationship also with Dave Tracy. Is that true? I know Greeley did.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I thought I heard that somewhere.
But Dave Tracy's famous for being friends with all types.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of
Don't
his,
jump to any conclusions, Frank.
one of his wonderful gifts.
Right.
Yeah.
Thomas, what was the Barron book you were referring to? Is that a biography of him?
The theology of Robert Barron.
Got it.
Which are the
And it's
associations or
available on Amazon.
which are the guys that struck you maybe surprising in his that were influencers for Barron?
The book seems to be organized according to the influencers, and I'm only on the second one, who was his and I don't know his name. But no, he was the his dissertation director.
Oh,
On and organized kind of by theme. So I read so many things that tend to confuse
there's
get
often
confused in one another.
there's often a real disparity, seeming disparity between the what and the how. I think Barron can maybe be a little off-putting in the how, but I really think the what is really solid. I mean, I've mentioned that many times. I really like Barron. But this salesmanship of his with respect to his stuff, the stuff that he writes or has written, that's a little sometimes off-putting.
Does anybody know who Matthew Levering is? He's the author of the Theology of Robert Barron. Anybody know about him?
Yes,
Not much.
Levering.
he studied with Matt Lamb at the BC when he was a grad student.
Ah,
A smart guy.
The chapter which I haven't gotten to yet, I'm in theocentrism, but the chapter on Christocentrism, the influences that he cites in the first paragraph are Skillebeck's, Ray Brown, and John Mayer.
Not chop
You could
liver.
do a lot worse, huh?
Yeah.
The worst, yeah.
in his formative period, his theology develops around a cast of thinkers, including Andrew Greeley, Michael Corbin, Raymond Brown, Edward Skillebeeks, John P. Meyer, George Lindbeck, Alistair McIntyre, Stanley Hauerwas, and Richard Rohr.
Yeah.
That's a fairly impressive, progressive, socially aware.
Yeah.
Levering shows in this book how Barron appropriated, elaborated, and critiqued the thought of these interlocutors to develop a powerful and nuanced theology of his own. Okay.
Has anybody read that book? And Now I See.
Also, that's one of his books.
Yeah, it's.
You've read it.
I'm sorry.
You read it, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I thought it was super.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, if you thought it was super.
Yeah.
What did you particularly? What do you hold from it that kind of grabbed you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, the first thing that comes to mind is wise as serpents and gentle as doves. If that makes any sense. What I think he deals with a whole lot of stuff, and I think he does it in a balanced way. Belief is what he's talking about. The Christian sees things in ways that other people don't, those who are not Christian. And to the extent that you are a genuine follower of Jesus, you're in an environment of wolves, but with the Savior, the Holy Spirit, it's a very doable, sometimes lonely, and sometimes challenging, or very challenging thing to be a leader, but hold fast. He has conquered the world, overcome the world, and you can do it. That's one of the kind of major themes that I see in a lot of the stuff that he does. And he'll say, I don't know, he got into big trouble because he said, he likes Hans Urs von Balthasar very, very, very much.
You could do a lot worse.
Oh yeah,
Indeed.
chopped liver there. And he went along with Balthasar and put together a 15-30 minute thing about salvation. And he said, we can hope that everyone will be saved. And I know that's not going to hit everybody the same. And boy, he got pillared for that. But by the same folks that are expecting evil out of the synod, So
Mhm.
did I make any sense?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I agree. I think there are some things I agree with him, and overall, I don't feel cozy and like warming up to him. But
Yeah.
I do think that notion, I think, and I've kind of got nudged a little bit about this before. I think the church toys, and I choose that word thoughtfully, toys with universal salvation.
Mhm.
It does not reject the possibility, but it doesn't embrace it either.
Yeah.
And
something-
you will find it throughout the scriptures in the Old Testament, where God is, the Israelites don't want him to focus on anybody but them,
Mhm.
or that he chose Cyrus and Darius, pagan Persian kings, to be the agents of bringing his people back,
Okay.
from exile to salvation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I agree with him on that, but I think he ran into a corner with his tail between his legs after the response that he got on that kind of thing. But I think he was leading in the right direction.
I
Well,
sure hope so.
Speaking of leading in the right direction, in complete silence thus far, without one single question, is Tim in the lower left-hand corner of my screen.
Yeah.
I want to say hello to Tim and say, Tim, how
What's
are
your-
you? Where are you today?
I'm fine.
What you thinking?
I had an excused absence from Monsignor Welbers. I take communion to a couple of ladies who are in the nursing home, and I couldn't go yesterday because a dear Cursista colleague of mine had his funeral, and so the funeral would have conflicted. I go to noontime mass and I get the Eucharist and then take it to these ladies. And so I did it today. And so, and I really stuck my foot in my mouth. Gosh, it became unusual for me. Anyway, so the lady I took communion to today, she is 94 years old, 94. And she and her husband, and she has been a widow for about 15 years, and she is in a nursing home because she fell and broke her clavicle and her left femur. Okay, so and she has a puppy, and she lived in an assisted living facility here in Henderson. She had a puppy, and so that immediately got Sandra and my attention. Like, what are you doing with your puppy? Because she's been in this nursing home for 3 months now. And she said, well, I found someone that took Bubba, I don't know what his name is, Bubba, into their home and taking care of him. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. And she's a delight. She and her husband had a very good corporate job, some sort of company where they traveled, and they had been to every single continent in the United States. They've been to the Arctic, they've been to Greenland, they've been to the Antarctic for a month's stay, because I think he may have been with National Science Foundation or something. And she is pretty darn alert. And so her roommate, and this is the awkward thing, and you guys have done this, about taking communion to someone who's in a room with another person, is you don't have any privacy. I mean, there's no privacy whatsoever. And so normally what I do is we have a protocol here, say a number of prayers before I give the Eucharist, but she didn't want that because she didn't want to, I don't know what, she didn't want to offend her roommate who was sitting like 2 feet away. And so we say the Our Father, Hail Mary, glory be, and then I give her communion and visit with her. So the foot and mouth disease that I have. And so I have been going there now for a couple of months, and I keep saying, when are you girls going to get home? When are you going to go home? Because her roommate's got to be 90 at the least. And I said, haven't they kicked you out yet? Trying to bring a little bit of humor. And Nancy turned to me quietly and said, Tim, May will never go home. She will never go home again. And it just, I thought to myself, guys, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine looking at my days ahead and being in a room that I'm sharing with some other person who is a total stranger with me. I'm in a wheelchair. I can't get around. And she will, this May, the other lady, will never go home. She will never go home. And I thought, wow, there's no solution to that issue. But it just made me sad. It just made me sad that May will live out and die in that room, in that nursing home, nursing facility. So it just kind of set me back a little bit, because I know that probably all of us at one time or another have thought about what are our end days going to be like? What's it going to be like when we are in our end days? Who are we going to be with, if anybody? Where are we going to perhaps be able to be? And yeah, that's all. That's why I've been kind of quiet. That's why.
Yeah, you really ring a bell for me. In the training program I did at the Palo Alto VA when I was a fellow in palliative and hospice chaplaincy care in the interdisciplinary fellowship, which means there were colleagues who were not only non-Catholic but non-Christian and non-believers who were part of the staff, 30, 40 people in the room. And the project I did was related to end of life and exactly that, going home. And I approached it from the perspective of music and art, and music in particular, and had the music therapist do 2 or 3 old hymns in terms of what it means to be going home. But the point of the presentation I was making was, when people start talking about going home, one wants to be careful to unpack that from the perspective of that person. What does that look like? And of course, they start talking about, the physical place, who's there, and the family and the stuff like that. But hidden in that is also language about what the actual dying and death process is about, what happens after death. And so beginning to scratch at that a little bit. But I remember the response from what I did was for my supervisor thought it was terrific, and so I got an A for the project. The other folk in the room, I could tell from the body language, were pretty uncomfortable with raising questions about mortality and stuff. But the bottom line, I know when I'm talking with people, when I'm doing home visits and nursing home visits, when they start talking, especially in the nursing home, about going home, not to read too much into that and try to get them talking about what they understand by that. And I have had a number of people who acknowledged, yeah, I'm probably never going to leave here, and I'm kind of wondering what happens after death.
Well, one of the things that happens,
I gotta leave, guys.
one of the things that happens,
Gotta go,
Hey,
Bob.
Bob.
Bye-bye,
like
Bob.
Tim Almy, he lost his internet.
Sorry?
One of the
Tim.
things that happens is, like Tim Almy, he lost his internet. So when you go home, you may lose your internet. No, Tim just texted me and said, I lost my internet.
Oh, okay. You had information the rest of us didn't have about what's Thomas talking. What's Thomas talking about there?
Tom, did he say he's coming back?
That probably depends on a power greater than him.
I think he's grieving.
That may be. I mean,
I hope he comes back.
you
So
know,
we can
when,
tell him that it was so much better for him to come out and worry about that woman not going home than saying, oh, poor Dot.
well,
Agreed.
agreed. But you know, we've spent most of a good bit of our time talking about our own facing of our mortality. Well, mentality too.
Both of them.
But
Yeah. The conversation for me has been triggered in the last few months about meeting with an estate planner looking at financial issues. Not that there's a whole great deal there, but basically my home here and in the hills, it has pretty good value, but it brings up questions. And in the last couple of weeks, as a result of meeting with the estate planning, of beginning the work of creating a revocable trust, along with other dimensions of the legality issues to kind of leave things as, it's never perfect, but as complete and simple for my family as possible. So hovering
Bob,
around.
hold that thought, but I just texted him back. Hope you can get back. We're missing you.
Thank you.
Good for you.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, not at all. I basically had finished. So just to say today's conversation's pretty relevant in terms of one dimension of my being at this point in my life journey, and with a birthday coming up in a few days, getting closer to the time frames of looking at, related to end of life kind of issues. And so none of us getting any younger here.
We ain't.
On that note, I better go get, it says you better plug in or you're gonna lose your signal. So I better go get a cord.
You know what Tim has might be contagious, Bob.
Uh-oh. Could well be.
I mean, Tim
Makes you
disappeared
wonder.
and now Bob Bono had to go, and
Well, he told
Gary
us
has
before.
disappeared.
Yeah, Fred, are you with us?
Has Disappeared. Fred, are you with us? Fred
He's
is muted.
I think he got
He's
up and
muted,
walked
yeah.
off, so maybe he's not back yet.
okay.
Gary has. Tim says out for several more hours. Didn't mean to leave on that note. So,
Well,
anyway. Are you plugged in? Are you rejuvenated, Bob?
Thank you. At least the computer is.
Okay.
As far as myself, well,
Fred is probably listening, but I muted him because there was some background noise there, and I'm asking him to unmute.
you were actually able to tell that it was coming from Fred's connection, eh?
Yeah, because it was Sue talking to him and he responding to her.
Oh, yeah.
can
Got it.
you unmute him from Thomas Central?
Unfortunately, I don't think I can. I can only ask him to unmute.
But you
I don't
can
know
mute him.
why. It permits the host to mute, but it does not permit the host to unmute. That is odd,
Kind of crazy.
but I keep asking him.
Sounds like an ideal mechanism for a bishop.
Well, anyway,
Gary,
There's Gary.
welcome back, Gary.
Was that I had to use the boys' room, talk about mortality. It's just part of
Yeah.
life.
Yes, this is the only group of folks our age who do not build in a bathroom break routinely after the first 45 to 50 minutes, sort of. And I don't know what that says about us other than we're flexible enough to take care of ourselves.
I think it has to do with brotherhood.
Brotherhood, I like
I
that.
think it's that.
It may have to do with coffee too.
It also may have to do the strength of your diuretic.
Yeah.
And it may have to do with the condition of your bladder, including
20 milligrams or 40 milligrams, whatever.
if you're suffering from TWBC, you know, a teeny weeny bladder condition, which seems to get teenier with the passing of years.
That it does, and I'm still haven't had the hernia surgery, so that's complicated mine a bit too.
When
When
is
is
that
it?
going to happen, John?
They told me Kaiser just went on strike.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know that
Tons.
that's influencing, but I got a belt that is a good support, and it's relieved a lot of the pain. But the bladder control, well, not bladder control, it's just that, what did you call it? Teeny weeny bladder
Condition, TWBC, yeah, it's not a bank.
more often. But I thought I'd share also about the culture here. It's a 3-story building with 92 or 93 residents. And I go down to the dining room usually 2 out of 3 meals. Breakfast is almost always so big that I take half of it back for lunch. But the point I wanted to make is people who aren't verbal, people who are disabled in many cases, but a wave of the hand, eye contact, I can tell it's rich. And I think that's part of my vocation here, is to be, acknowledging people's reality as much as I can. And, obviously I sit with people where we can have conversations and such, but it's a place where folks are on that path, and they can be isolated or they can be joyfully acknowledged. And it's clear that the staff here are trained for that purpose, knowing people's names, anticipating needs. It's not inexpensive, but it's worth it, absolutely. But that acknowledging of people, a hand gesture, a wink, a nod, I'm sure the rest of you do the same, but I get a chance to do it a lot every day.
Johnny, can I ask how much does it cost?
$4,300 a month. And
That's basic without any extra care, right?
that's without extra care. Yeah. And there was a $6,000 enrollment, which I paid in 3 installments. But when we penciled out where I lived before, paying about $2,400 a month, but then utilities and HOA membership and food and
Insurance.
all of that. So it balances out. It definitely makes very good sense, and a lot of peace for the rest of my family that they know I'm so well looked after.
I sort of think of that, Johnny, as psychic pay or psychic reimbursement.
There you go. There you go.
What I find interesting, I was at Nazareth House for 5 years, and particularly at the end of my time there, I was paying close to $4,000. I would say about $3,700 a month for what was basic rent, and I think that was probably a special priest's rate, which means probably the average layperson coming in would have paid probably closer to $4,000, $4,300, and the care was not nearly the quality that you have.
Uh-huh.
It was much more basic. There weren't the social activities. There wasn't the personal attention that was quite what you described. And it's
Right.
it's interesting. I do think the Sisters of Nazareth are struggling,
Oh,
and struggling very much to try to maintain more or less what they had built. And I'm not too sure that they're winning that battle.
Right.
just off the top, I would think a bishop should really care about that. Do they have a patron bishop, do you think?
No, they don't even have, they don't even have a department in the archdiocese anymore. There used to be a health services department with a with a full-time director and at least secretarial staff. But there isn't that anymore. That's part of all the budget cut crap.
Right. One of the projects that I did, because I could elect what kind of project, but I needed to do several of them in the course of the year when I was at the Palo Alto VA, was to get around to the Diocese of San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and Sacramento, and meet with the person charged with what would be the equivalent of the late retirement period for diocesan priests.
Mm-hmm.
And I was particularly interested, obviously, with regard to the end of life transitioning to new life, and the kind of care being offered. No surprise to any of you, I'm sure. The kind of offerings and care available vary directly with the wealth of the diocese, the size of the diocese, and it was almost mathematical. So the smaller, poorer diocese had few, if any, facilities, and also because I would ask questions, what about this neighboring diocese, which I'm not going to have time to get to, but again, no real surprises, and I found that rather shocking.
Well, I'm living in a diocesan place, and I pay $1,800 a month.
Unreal.
And I have all my meals, laundry, my bed made, and room cleaned 3 times a week. I have the study I'm sitting in, a large bedroom, a bath, and a balcony outside. And Gary was here. I'm sorry.
Great food.
And it was Cardinal Cushing who founded this 60 years ago. And I think it's probably the best, certainly in the country, in terms of what it offers. And, we have a second floor. Like I told you today that I was with a priest who was talking to me about his dying. Well, he's on the second floor, and I go and see him all the time. And he's going to go into hospice, but here, not outside.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's another, a lot of people saw Cushing as the backslapper, an old Boston Paul, etc. But he had wonderful vision in certain areas, and this was one of them.
Yeah.
This piece of property always makes us nervous, because this piece of property is virtually in the middle of Massachusetts General Hospital.
Yeah.
And so if you would value it, you have to look at it in that if Massachusetts General Hospital wanted to buy this piece of property, it would certainly be in the tens of millions, if not 100 million.
Probably in the hundreds.
And so and the house is full now. There's about 50 priests here. We anticipate over time that as the numbers get smaller, it will be less full. And it's not dependent on the diocese. It's a separate trust called the Clergy Trust that was set up a few years ago. So, for instance, we just had a dinner in Boston with 1,200 people at it that raised 1.65 million for the trust. And so the healthcare of the priests and this place are all paid for out of the trust. They're not dependent on the diocese. So I mean, I think it's really good thinking in terms of, you know, and more than likely I'll die here,
Yeah,
but hopefully not too soon, but
And it sounds like Cushing deserves the credit for the initial creation, but somebody else is making sure that trust carries on, yeah?
that's right. For a long time, the trust really wasn't doing that well. And they brought in a guy about 15 years ago who was a genius investor. And he took the trust separate from the diocese and started investing. And it's quite healthy now.
I can certainly attest that it's a Frank. You guys were very gracious to both Harry and I, and the rooms were comfortable. I'd work it out a little bit if I were to be there for a while, but it was it's very comfortable, and I mean we had breakfast together, and I don't know what the rest of the meals are like, but it's a lovely place. And you would see all kinds of priests that you knew at different points, in your priesthood. I mean, because you were gone for quite a while, but you still know a lot of guys, and I can imagine the priests that were in active ministry all that time would have a ton of contacts.
Right.
And you're close to the North End.
We're in downtown Boston.
Yeah.
So you can walk to Faneuil Hall, you can walk to City Hall, you can walk to Mass General Hospital.
You can ride the swan boats in the common.
If you want to go over to the common, yeah.
I'm gonna bug out. I'm gonna have lunch with two elderly people, three. Well, and I'm the fourth. We're talking about 90s. This is a woman, Irene Carndozola, is going to take myself and my friend Mary McCaffrey, who's 96. It's our birthday lunch. I turned into 81 on the 19th, and Mary turned 96 on the 25th. So,
good.
Happy birthday,
Happy
Mom.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Great little Italian restaurant here in town called Cucina Paradiso. So I have
Surprise Italian, eh?
I have to suffer through the rest of Friday.
Yeah. Have a great time.
And I'll
Get
see
a nice Negroni.
Right.
Thank you, and I'll see you next week.
All right.
Hey, I'm going to be joining Gary. I have an appointment in Berkeley at 12:30, 3:30 East Coast time. So I bid you all adieu. As
So
usual.
why don't we bid one another after you?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
God
Take
bless
care.
you all.
God
and,
bless everybody.
God
Take
bless. Yes, thank you. Good week.
Okay.